Hi there. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and I'm 32 years old. I live in a small 2-bedroom apartment in Portland, Oregon, where the rain seems to match my mood most days. I work as a freelance graphic designer, which sounds more glamorous than it actually is. Most of my time is spent hunched over my laptop, creating logos for local businesses and trying to make ends meet. I guess you could say I'm the forgotten daughter, the one who didn't get the family heirloom, the one who got silence instead of precious jewelry. But let me start from the beginning, because this story, my story, is about to take a turn I never saw coming. Growing up, I was always the quiet one. My older sister, Rebecca, was the golden child. She was 3 years older, blonde where I was brunette, outgoing where I was reserved. She had this way of lighting up a room just by walking into it, while I preferred to blend into the background. Our parents, well, they made it pretty clear who their favorite was. Rebecca got piano lessons. I got hand-me-down books from the library. Rebecca got the brand new car for her 16th birthday. I got a part-time job at the local diner to save up for a used Honda Civic. Rebecca got to go to State University. I got a community college education that I paid for myself, working nights at that same diner. But the thing that hurt the most, the thing that still makes my chest tight when I think about it, she got Grandma Eleanor's necklace. That necklace was something special. It wasn't just jewelry. It was family history. Grandma Eleanor used to tell us stories about how her grandmother had brought it from Ireland in 1892, sewn into the lining of her coat. It was this beautiful piece with intricate Celtic knots and a small emerald in the center. Nothing too flashy, but it had this weight to it. You know? Not just physical weight, but emotional weight. It represented our family's journey, our struggles, our survival. When Grandma Eleanor passed away 10 years ago, I was 22 and still naive enough to think that maybe, just maybe, I'd inherit something meaningful, something that would make me feel connected to my family's story. Instead, I watched as my mother carefully fastened that necklace around Rebecca's neck at the funeral, like she was crowning a queen. "It should go to the eldest," Mom had said, not even looking at me. It's tradition, tradition. That word has haunted me for a decade. What I got instead was silence. Not just about the necklace, but about everything. After Grandma's funeral, it was like a wall went up between me and my family. Rebecca started calling less. My parents seemed to have even less time for me than before. Holiday invitations became sparse. I felt like I was slowly being erased from the family picture. I tried to bridge the gap. I really did. I'd call Rebecca, suggest we grab coffee, try to plan sister dates like we used to do when we were younger. But she was always busy. Always had somewhere more important to be. Always had some excuse that made it clear I wasn't a priority. My parents weren't much better. Dad would give me these awkward, distant hugs when I visited, like he wasn't sure how to interact with me anymore. Mom would make polite conversation about my work, but I could tell she was just going through the motions. They'd light up when Rebecca brought her kids around. But when I visited, it felt like they were tolerating my presence rather than enjoying it. The worst part was watching Rebecca flourish while I struggled. She married her college sweetheart, David, who landed a great job at a tech company. They bought a beautiful house in the suburbs, had 2 adorable kids, and seemed to be living this perfect American dream. Meanwhile, I was bouncing between freelance projects, dating guys who never seemed to stick around, and wondering what I had done wrong to deserve this treatment. I started to believe that maybe I was the problem. Maybe I was too sensitive, too needy, too something. Maybe I deserved the silence. But then, 3 weeks ago, everything changed. I was sitting in my kitchen, working on a particularly frustrating logo design for a local coffee shop, when my phone rang. The caller ID showed my mother's name, which was strange because she hardly ever called me anymore. My heart did this little skip. You know how it is when you're not used to getting calls from someone you love. "Sarah?" Mom's voice sounded different, smaller somehow. "Can you come home? Your father. He's in the hospital." The drive from Portland to our small hometown of Millbrook took 3 hours, but it felt like an eternity. My mind was racing with questions I couldn't answer. Was Dad okay? How serious was it? Why hadn't anyone called me sooner? When I arrived at Millbrook General Hospital, I found Rebecca in the waiting room, still wearing her expensive work clothes and that damn necklace. She looked up when I walked in, and for a moment, I saw something in her eyes. Surprise, maybe? Like she hadn't expected me to show up. "Sarah," she said, standing awkwardly. "I didn't know Mom called you." "Of course she called me," I replied, though part of me wondered if it had been an afterthought. He's my father, too. We sat in uncomfortable silence after that, the weight of 10 years of distance filling the space between us. I wanted to ask her about her kids, about her life, about why she'd let our relationship deteriorate like this. But instead, I just sat there, listening to the beeping of machines and the hushed conversations of other families dealing with their own crises. Dad pulled through. It was a mild heart attack, scary but not life-threatening. But something about seeing him in that hospital bed, looking so fragile and small, made me realize how much time we'd all wasted, how much of our lives we'd spent maintaining this ridiculous silence instead of just talking to each other. That night, staying at Mom and Dad's house in my old bedroom, I made a decision. I was going to try one more time to rebuild these relationships. I was going to swallow my pride, ignore the years of hurt, and see if we could find our way back to being a family. I had no idea that fate was about to make that decision for all of us, because 2 days later, Dad had another heart attack. This one was massive, and this time, he didn't pull through. And now, here I am, sitting in the law office of Henderson and Associates, waiting for the reading of my father's will. Rebecca is here, of course, sitting across from me in her black dress and her perfect makeup, that emerald necklace glinting in the afternoon light streaming through the office windows. Mom is dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, looking lost and older than her 68 years. The lawyer, Mr. Henderson, is shuffling through papers with the kind of careful attention that suggests he's about to deliver news that will change everything. I'm not expecting much. I've learned not to expect much from my family. But something about the way Mr. Henderson keeps glancing at me, something about the thickness of the document in his hands, makes me think that maybe, just maybe, this time will be different. Maybe this time, I won't be the one who gets silence. The clock on the wall ticks steadily, each second feeling like an hour. Outside, I can hear the distant sound of traffic, people going about their normal lives while mine is about to be turned upside down in ways I can't even imagine. Mr. Henderson clears his throat and looks up at us with serious eyes. "Ladies," he begins, "there are some things in this will that may come as a surprise to you. Your father was very specific about his wishes, and he wanted me to read this document in its entirety before we discuss any questions you might have." I feel my heart start to race. Something about his tone, something about the way he's looking at me, tells me that my father's final act is about to reveal secrets that have been buried for far too long. And suddenly, I'm not sure I'm ready for what's coming next. Mr. Henderson adjusted his glasses and opened the thick folder in front of him. The leather chair creaked as he leaned forward, and I could feel the tension in the room thickening, like fog rolling in from the Oregon coast. I, Robert James Mitchell, being of sound mind and body, he began, his voice steady and professional. The standard legal language washed over me at first. Dad's voice seemed to echo through the lawyer's words, and I found myself remembering the last real conversation we'd had. It was 3 years ago, at Rebecca's son's birthday party. I'd been standing alone by the fence, watching everyone else laugh and play, when Dad had walked over. "You know, Sarah," he'd said quietly, "sometimes the things we don't say are the heaviest burdens we carry." I'd thought he was talking about Mom's tendency to hold grudges, or maybe his own struggle with showing emotion. I never imagined he was talking about something much bigger. To my eldest daughter, Rebecca Ann Mitchell Thompson, I leave my collection of vintage tools and the 1967 Mustang currently stored in the garage. Rebecca shifted in her seat. I could see her trying to look appropriately grateful, but I knew she had no interest in Dad's tools or his old car. To my youngest daughter, Sarah Elizabeth Mitchell, I leave the sum of $50,000 from my personal savings account. My breath caught. $50,000, that was more money than I'd ever had at one time. But even as relief flooded through me, I felt that familiar sting, still the afterthought, still getting the consolation prize while Rebecca got the sentimental items. But Mr. Henderson wasn't finished. "However," he continued, and the word hung in the air like a thundercloud, "there are additional provisions that require explanation." He pulled out a separate document, this one handwritten in Dad's familiar scrawl. My heart started racing again. Your father left specific instructions for me to read this letter aloud. He wanted both of you to hear this together. Mr. Henderson cleared his throat again. My dear daughters, if you're hearing this, then I'm gone. And it's time for truths I should have told you long ago. Mom's tissue dabbing stopped. Rebecca sat up straighter. I felt like I couldn't breathe. Sarah, my darling girl, I need you to know that your mother and I didn't favor Rebecca because we loved you less. We favored her because we were afraid. Afraid? I glanced at Mom, whose face had gone pale. Her hands were shaking. When you were born, Sarah, you looked exactly like someone we thought we'd never see again. You looked like my sister, Margaret. Sister? Dad had never mentioned having a sister. In all my 32 years, he'd never once talked about any siblings. Margaret was my twin sister. She was 3 minutes older than me, and she never let me forget it. Even through the lawyer's voice, I could hear Dad's attempt at humor. She was beautiful, brilliant, and brave in ways that scared our parents. In 1962, when she was just 19, she fell in love with a black man named James Washington. The room seemed to spin. 1962. Oregon. I could only imagine what that meant. Our parents, your grandparents, were furious. They threatened to disown her, to cut her off completely. But Margaret didn't care. She said love was more important than their prejudices. She and James were planning to move to California, to San Francisco, where they could be together without the judgment of this small town. Rebecca was staring at the lawyer like she'd never seen him before. I felt like I was hearing about a completely different family than the one I'd grown up in. The night before they were supposed to leave, there was an accident. Margaret and James were driving on Highway 18, heading to Portland to catch their bus. A drunk driver hit them head-on. They both died instantly. Mom let out a sob, and I realized this wasn't news to her. She'd known all along. I was 19 years old, and I'd lost my twin sister, my best friend, my other half. Our parents forbade us from even mentioning her name after the funeral. They said she'd brought shame on the family, that her death was God's punishment for her choices. They burned her letters, her photos, everything that proved she'd existed. My hands were clenched so tightly my knuckles were white. I thought about all the times I'd asked Dad about his family, all the times he'd changed the subject or given vague answers about being an only child. I kept one thing, though. I kept the necklace that had belonged to Margaret, the one our grandmother gave her before she died. Our parents planned to bury it with her, but I couldn't let them. It was all I had left of my sister, the necklace, the emerald necklace that Rebecca wore around her neck like a crown. We were so afraid that if we showed Sarah too much attention, people would start asking questions. Small towns have long memories, and there were still people alive who remembered Margaret. We thought if we kept Sarah in the background, if we made Rebecca the focus, we could protect her from the judgment that destroyed my sister. Protect me. They'd been trying to protect me by pushing me away. But in doing so, we failed you, Sarah. We failed you terribly. We let our fear make us cruel to the daughter who needed us most. And Rebecca, we failed you too by putting pressure on you to be perfect, to be the daughter who would make everyone forget about the scandal. Rebecca was crying now, silent tears streaming down her face. I wanted to hate her, but I couldn't. She'd been just as much a victim of our parents' fear as I had been. Sarah, the necklace should have been yours. Margaret would have wanted you to have it. You are so much like her. Creative, independent, unafraid to be yourself even when the world tells you to be something else. The necklace belongs with you. I looked at Rebecca again, and this time she was looking back at me. Slowly, she reached up and unclasped the necklace from around her neck. There's more, Mr. Henderson said gently. Your father established a trust fund, Sarah. It's been growing for 32 years, since the day you were born. The current value is just over $400,000. $400,000. I felt dizzy. He also left you this house, Sarah. And Rebecca, he left you the cabin at the lake, along with a separate trust fund of equivalent value. Mom spoke for the first time since we'd arrived. He wanted to make things right, she whispered. He spent the last 10 years trying to figure out how to undo the damage we'd done. There's one more thing, Mr. Henderson said, pulling out a small wooden box. Your father left this for you personally, Sarah. Inside the box was a bundle of letters tied with a faded ribbon. and a small black and white photograph of a young woman who looked exactly like me. The woman in the photo was laughing, her arm around a handsome black man who was looking at her like she was the most wonderful thing in the world. "Letters from Margaret to your father," Mr. Henderson explained. "He kept them all these years. He thought you should know about the woman you look like, the woman you apparently take after in more ways than just appearance." I picked up the top letter with shaking hands. The handwriting was elegant, confident. It was dated 3 days before her death. "Bobby," it read, "I know you're scared for me. I know you think I'm making a mistake. But I'd rather live 1 year as myself than 50 years as someone else's idea of who I should be. James makes me feel like I can be anything, do anything, be brave enough to change the world. I hope someday you'll understand that love isn't something to be ashamed of. It's something to be celebrated." I couldn't read anymore. The tears were coming too fast, too hard. But they weren't just tears of sadness. They were tears of relief, of finally understanding, of pieces falling into place. Rebecca stood up and walked over to me. Without saying a word, she placed the necklace in my hands. Her fingers were trembling as much as mine. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry, Sarah. I didn't know. I never knew." I looked up at her, this sister I'd spent so many years resenting, and saw that she was just as lost as I was. We'd both been casualties of our parents' well-intentioned but misguided attempts to protect us from a past we'd never even known existed. "I know," I said. And for the first time in years, I meant it. "I know you didn't know." Mom was openly sobbing now. "We thought we were doing the right thing," she said through her tears. "We thought if we kept you separate, if we made you less visible, you'd be safer. But we just made you lonely. We made you both lonely." I stood up suddenly, the weight of everything crashing down on me at once. Margaret's necklace felt heavy in my hands, but it was a good weight, like it had been waiting for me all these years. "I need some air," I said, heading for the door. "Sarah, wait." Rebecca started to follow me. "No," I said, not unkindly. "I need a minute. I need to think." I stepped out into the hallway, then outside into the crisp autumn air of Millbrook. The town looked the same as it always had. Small, quiet, stuck in time. But now I saw it differently. Now I wondered how many other secrets were hiding behind the neat facades and manicured lawns. I fastened Margaret's necklace around my neck, feeling the weight of it against my chest. It was heavier than I'd expected, but it felt right, like it had been waiting for me all these years. As I stood there, trying to process everything I'd learned, I realized that my father's death had done more than just bring our family together for a will reading. It had given us a chance to start over, to build something new from the ruins of all those years of silence. But it had also given me something else. A choice. I could stay in Millbrook, try to rebuild these relationships, try to be the family we'd never quite managed to be. Or I could take Margaret's necklace and her letters and discover who I really was, separate from all the fear and secrets that had shaped my life. For the first time in my life, I felt like I actually had options. The question was, what was I brave enough to choose? The coffee shop in downtown Portland was bustling with the usual morning crowd, but I barely noticed the noise around me. I was focused on my laptop screen, putting the finishing touches on a logo design for a nonprofit organization that helped young artists find their voice. It was exactly the kind of work I'd dreamed of doing, but never thought I'd have the courage to pursue. A lot had changed in the year since Dad's funeral. The bell above the door chimed, and I looked up to see Rebecca walking in, scanning the crowd until she spotted me. She was dressed more casually than I was used to seeing her. Jeans and a simple sweater instead of her usual business attire. She'd been doing that more lately, letting herself be less perfect, more real. "Sorry I'm late," she said, sliding into the chair across from me. David had to leave early for his conference and the kids were being, well, kids. I smiled and closed my laptop. "No problem. I was just finishing up some work." "The Mitchell Design Studio keeping you busy?" she asked, and I could hear the genuine pride in her voice. "Busier than I expected," I admitted. The trust fund Dad had left me had given me the freedom to start my own design business, focusing on clients whose missions I actually cared about. It wasn't making me rich, but it was making me happy. How are things at the house? Rebecca and her family had moved into Dad's house. My house, technically, 6 months ago. Their suburban home had sold quickly, and she'd asked, somewhat hesitantly, if they could rent the family home from me while they figured out their next steps. It had seemed like the right thing to do. The house was too big for just me, and it felt good knowing it was filled with laughter again. Good, really good, actually. She paused, then reached into her purse. I have something for you. She pulled out a small, wrapped package and placed it on the table between us. Happy birthday, Sarah. I'd almost forgotten. 33 felt like just another day, but Rebecca had insisted we celebrate properly this year. You didn't have to open it, she interrupted with a smile. Inside the package was a small silver frame containing a photo I'd never seen before. It showed two young women who looked remarkably similar, arms around each other, laughing at something off camera. One of them was clearly Margaret. I recognized her from the photo Dad had left me. The other took me a moment to place. Is that Grandma Eleanor when she was young? Rebecca confirmed. I found it in Mom's things when we were cleaning out her apartment. Look at the back. I turned the frame over. In faded ink, someone had written, Margaret and Eleanor, 1960, sisters by choice, friends by heart. Grandma Eleanor wasn't our biological grandmother, Rebecca said quietly. She was Margaret's best friend. When Margaret died, Eleanor stepped in to help Dad through his grief. She became family because she chose to be family. I stared at the photo, understanding flooding through me. The necklace hadn't been passed down through generations of blood relatives. It had been passed between women who had chosen to love and support each other. And now it was mine, not because of genetics, but because of choice. There's something else, Rebecca continued. Mom wants to see you. I looked up from the photo. Mom had been living in an assisted living facility since her small stroke 3 months ago. Her recovery had been good, but the experience had changed her, made her more fragile, more aware of time passing. How is she? Better. Different, but better. She talks about Margaret now. She says she's tired of keeping secrets. Rebecca reached across the table and touched my hand. She wants to tell you about her. About what Margaret was really like. I felt the familiar weight of Margaret's necklace against my chest. I'd worn it every day since the will reading, and it had become as much a part of me as my own heartbeat. I'd like that, I said, and I meant it. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the busy Portland street through the coffee shop window. People hurried past with their own stories, their own secrets, their own complicated families. You know what I realized? Rebecca said suddenly. We spent so many years competing for something that was never really a competition. Mom and Dad's love, the family history, even that stupid necklace. But there was enough for both of us. There always had been. She was right. We'd been so focused on what the other person had that we'd missed what we could have together. I'm thinking about selling the house, I said suddenly. The words surprised me as much as they seemed to surprise Rebecca. Why? Because I want to travel. I want to see the places Margaret wrote about in her letters. I want to understand who she was, who I am. I paused, gathering courage for what I wanted to say next. And I was wondering if you and the kids might want to come with me. Just for a few weeks this summer. A family trip. Rebecca's eyes widened. Really? Really? I've been reading Margaret's letters, and she wrote about this little town in Northern California, where she and James were planning to start their new life. I thought maybe we could go see it. All of us. Mom too, if she's feeling up to it. Rebecca was quiet for a long moment, and I worried I'd overstepped. Then she smiled, and it was the kind of smile I remembered from when we were children, before everything got complicated. I think that sounds perfect, she said. The kids would love it. And Mom would love to tell you stories about Margaret. I closed my eyes for a moment, feeling something settle into place. This wasn't the family I'd grown up in, marked by silence and secrets and competition. This was something new, something we were choosing to build together. When I opened my eyes, Rebecca was looking at me with an expression I'd never seen before. It was love, yes, but also respect, recognition. She was seeing me, not as the forgotten daughter or the problematic sister, but as Sarah, just Sarah. Finally, thank you, she said quietly. For what? For not giving up on us, for being brave enough to try again. I touched Margaret's necklace, thinking about the woman who had chosen love over fear, adventure over safety. Authenticity over acceptance. She'd paid a terrible price for those choices. But she'd lived as herself. She'd been true to who she was, even when it was dangerous. "I learned from the best," I said, thinking of an aunt I'd never met, but whose courage lived on in faded letters and family stories. Outside, the Portland rain had started again, creating patterns on the coffee shop window. But for once, the weather didn't match my mood. For once, everything felt bright and possible. We had a trip to plan, stories to share, and a family to rebuild. And for the first time in my life, I knew exactly who I was. Sarah Mitchell, keeper of Margaret's necklace, sister to Rebecca, daughter to parents who had loved imperfectly but truly. Most importantly, I was finally free to write my own story. The inheritance had given me money and property, but the real gift had been something much more valuable: the truth. And with that, truth came the freedom to choose who I wanted to be, who I wanted to love, and how I wanted to live. Just like Margaret had always said, love wasn't something to be ashamed of, it was something to be celebrated. And finally we were ready to celebrate.